Right, so I'm going to minimize on my end over here. Just make sure that I can see everything. Just make sure we can take a look. Just in case you're not supposed to be here, this is the session that's going on right now. The Here on live stream one. Maybe you were supposed to be on two. Watch out for that big finger click. Admin in an hour. The espresso shot. Yes, this is the morning coffee, right there. That's so much for the espresso. I'm going to go ahead and begin because this is recorded after all, so you can always come back and take a look at this. So we'll start over here, and we will probably take a look at the QA because this is live events. Take a look at the QA a little bit later. If there's anything that's important, the moderator will hopefully come in and smack me and say, "Hey, Ralph, attend to X," and we will. So who am I? I'm Ralph Rivas, recent MVP for business applications. Even though I've been doing this for a while, now I'm, let's just say, more into the community than I have been. And you'll see over here on Twitter where I'm at on Big Picks 2000. I run the Chicago Microsoft Power Platform user group, and we get a lot of help from our friends in the East Coast. So I'm just returning the favor, and help run the M365 Chicago conference. So there's our M365 Chicago link. So just like this conference over here, that one is basically from Chicago. We're sort of global in scope as well, but it's really about, like say, a theme. I also am a co-podcaster at cloudtalkshow.com. We try to do a live show over YouTube every Friday. And there's my LinkedIn right over there. Yes, feel free. It's wide open. Come and check it out. My focus, of course, is M365 as a power user developer, and naturally because of not just because of the MVP, but probably because of this came the MVP, is the fact that I'm a power addict with Power Platform. What was it? It was Excel, the original power low-code system, right? So I was doing that from quite the early versions. I'm dating myself. There was a document out there called the Power Platform Licensing Guide for the community. That's no longer there, but actually that's a good thing, because if the community had to explain licensing, there's a miss at this point. And Microsoft did catch up, and they said, we're going to take it down now. It's like, so what should I think about that? Is that a good thing? Actually, it is. Just saying. All right, semi-mild-mannered architect by day, which means maybe I'm not so mild-mannered afterwards. But actually, later on, I'm in Chicago, so got to do entertainment, music and comedy, right? Bit of a travel agent, tour guide, teacher, and mentor. And there's me in my mentor mode right over there. Let's go ahead and get started over here. Let's take a look at our time.
Hey, Ralph.
Make sure. Good. Yes, go ahead.
Quick, I'm seeing your in the preview mode of PowerPoint. Is it go into presenter mode or?
Oh, it's in preview mode?
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing, preview mode.
Interesting. So you know what? I'm going to change my settings here.
Just the way it was, and then it got stuck. Or no, I see your mouse. I'm just seeing.
And let's see.
Is
that better?
Now it's kicked up. Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Oh, right. Okay, so better than preview mode. We're now in the other mode. I see what happened. That so-called presenter view. When you have a single screen. I'm not in my normal layer where I have all my multiple crazy machines. I just have the single one, so it's hard. But anyways, great. Let's just get going here. So the agenda for today is basically being an admin. Basically, what does it mean to be an admin? We're really focused on the admin and you'll see why. About key responsibilities you'd have, some relevant admin roles in M365 that affect you, what an admin probably should do, or actually what it should do. Take it from there. Some guidance. Yes, can't leave here without some guidance. Some tools. Hey, you went to Sears to go find tools. You're going to find tools, and now I'm dating myself. Some next steps that you could follow up with, and a little bit of an ask me anything, or rather, if there's time, we'll try to do the QA in the end. And there will be a chance to do QA online. After all, online is 24/7, and you can always do QA directly with me through those contacts. All right. Some of our motivation for being here, Microsoft, thank you for providing part of this slide. Some of it looks a little dated and old, but actually a lot of it has actually come true, right? The fact that there are so many millions of apps over here that are going to be built over the next, our lifetimes, right? The demand getting higher, all the folks trying to find technical talent. I see a lot of this stuff that you're seeing over here happened pre-pandemic, and the fact that a lot of this has come true and in spades is a big deal. So our motivation is when they make these predictions, they might be true. Let us follow through. All right, just a quick review in case, again, we don't know. Yes, this is the Power Platform. These are all the friendly family of friends for the Power Platform. Portals is in here as actually a very important piece, so I just made sure that that had a home. Essentially, innovation everywhere, unlocks value everywhere. Okay, we have the idea of what we're looking at. Now, as a quick note, when we talk about admin, it could mean all of these things, or it could mean some of these things, and that'll depend, and we'll go through that. All right, get a little dizzy over here. So what does it, we just asked the question, right? What does it mean to be a Power Platform administrator? So essentially you want to, it's sometimes it's about perceptions, right? I don't know if you've ever seen this one. It's like, well, what is the admin? Is that person that actually some people think that we play games all day because we're administrators? What can they be doing? No one's asking them. I'm not talking to them. They must be there. Your mom probably loves you, so you're an admin. Ooh, you're major, right? Society might think you're the guy with the red stapler. Your boss is wondering, it's like, what are they doing over there? Just sitting around. Your own perception might be like, I'm manipulating essentially my robot masters over here, and perhaps what you're really doing is just turning things on and off. Not necessarily the case, but with that perception out of the way, you ask this big question: the one and only, really, are you the only administrator? Right? And the administrator, or is there a team? This is the big deal. Because the first tip I'm going to give you right now is you do not fly solo if you can help it. Sometimes you may not have a choice. Maybe that's how it works out. But now I'm going to help you get the case for not being solo. Essentially, Microsoft, in the guidance documentation, talks about, in their definition, the Power Platform admin team. They don't say the administrator. There's no documentation that says the administrator will blah, blah, blah. They will say the admin team is, in this case, responsible for, in this case, in fact, this definition is almost like your job description. Establishing the environment strategy, setting up data loss prevention, managing users, capacity, and licensing. They also make data available through the makers and connectors and integration or migration. This is actually quote for your JD. If one of these items are not there, or you're doing something more than this, that's the time when you want to get into alignment with your bosses or with the stakeholders to say, what are we really supposed to do? And the thing is, it's a team that does this. All right. All right, if it's a team, I know it shouldn't be one. How many people should be in there? Well, there's a rule for admins in M365 in general. Essentially, an admin needs to have at least a backup. So you're a team of at least two. You want to be a team. Hey, two has a T, and so does teams. Okay, there we go. There's your set of teams. All right, the best practice is you want to have an admin set for each key role, and we're going to go through these key roles a little bit later. All right, too many admins are bad, so the other T, 20, for example, sort of defeats the purpose. Imagine 20 global admins. Well, that's great. We're covered all the time zones. So what are you going to have, like an admin per hour of each of the 24-hour cycles? Too many chefs in the soup is a true thing that can go wrong in administration, and that's just not for the Power Platform, but in general. All right, essentially, your workload will ultimately decide it. So in the end of the day, how much work that has to be done. Say there's a whole bunch of folks that need to be onboarded and they need to be reviewed. And assuming you have yet to automate certain things, or you are automated, but it still requires the human to look at stuff, that workload is what's going to say how many folks you need to be in there. All right, here's the concept of the cross-admin roles. This is okay. Again, consider the workload. So I might be the Power Platform admin, but I might also be in the Power Platform admin group, but I might be also in the SharePoint admin group. Just think about that for a moment and think about the kind of work that might go on. And we'll actually go through that and dive in. All right, big picture is the roles and responsibilities for the Power Platform teams. These are the kind of teams that are out there, and we're going to see this. The low-code strategy is a team to itself. These are the folks that would align the actual strategy pieces. They drive the innovation. They're the key decision makers. They're not the admins. These are the folks that sort of like are the, how do we say it? These are the generals that say, here's how we're going to do it, troops, and this is where we're going to make it happen. And these over here are the folks on the field. This would be your group if you're coming in as the admin. The Power Platform admin team. Again, we have our environment strategies, DLP policies, the guardrails, licensing management. This is the team that we're going to be focusing on over here. But let's look at those other teams. Folks that do app in a days, solution envisioning, and everything else, are they admins? Well, if you're an admin and they're making you do this stuff, workload, watch out. Same with the first. Let's keep going through that. The concept of automation and DevOps and architecture reviews, and handling the app catalog and everything else, that really should be its own team. So consider that. All right, and of course, user support. Imagine you're the admin and you're also on the help desk. Oh dear, I'm sorry for you, but you may want to consider pushing back a little bit. On that one in particular. But that, as you can see, is its own group. So maybe take a shot of this right over here, and you can present back to your organization and say, does this exist in my organization? Are these folks divided into this, or are we cross-rolled into that? Look into your workload. Let's look at our key responsibilities. And now we're going to focus on the administration team itself. Essentially, keeping us safe. There's two parts, right? Keeping us safe and the licensing control that they talk about. Keeping us safe is that the DLP. All right, it's a lot of monitoring. Right, we're not just sitting there on the desk waiting and reacting. They give us a lot of tools in the admin center, in the CoE toolkit, which we'll talk about. All of these tools allow us to watch for things. We're essentially another set of eyes to be looking at this. And when I say another set, because obviously, what about security? Isn't there a security team? So, big thing here. The Power Platform administrators can be directly in charge of security of these bits. But remember, this is ultimately the responsibility of the true security group. If there is no security group, that's a major red flag, but it's not likely if you're in a organization of any serious size and on the internet. There will be someone or some group that would be handling that security. You just want to be their friends and they have to work with you. Maybe in context, they might give you more responsibilities. That's fine. But this is important that you have these in place. All right. So with that out of the way, there's the concept of managing capacity and monitoring these services. Remember, I said monitoring, you get to see all this stuff going through and everything else. Let's make sure to know it's right. Look, okay. And we have the concept of watching these API calls. You'd be watching for that. License management. So there's an issue there because that's sort of a crossover for places. That tenant administration responsibilities, a little bit of that. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. And then the concept is if self-service is on or not. Do you have that situation at your organization where people can just self-service? I'm going to give myself a license. Well, that's a big question because if you're an admin and you have no control of who decides who lives or dies in that particular sense, that's more work for you. You can do it. I mean, there's ways to deal with it, but it's most important that you know what that is and make that decision whether or not you're going to deal with it. So there's a lot of tenants that just simply turn that off. Let's just make it easy. But really, it's up to that group. And of course, by the way, there is a script to update that policy, and here it is. You can actually turn that on and off. So most folks will start going into this to turn it off right away. You're going to take this one. Oh, I better turn it off. We got that on. Let's turn it off. And by the way, if you're running script, you probably need to have powers to run script. So warning, for any script that you see over here, you probably need powers. And if you don't have it, be friends with your M365 tenant global admin. Other responsibilities over here we talked about. The guardrails. What is that? Essentially, this is only possible. Basically, you're communicating to folks. Remember, you're just monitoring. The guardrail says, hey, I see you hitting the rails or I see you about to go off the rails. And the only way that helps in your responsibility is that you have to report it. You have to deal with it. This is the most important thing for an admin. When you have reports, what's the point of a report? A report in the forest that falls down will not be heard, will not be seen. Does it have any effect? No, it doesn't. Data integration and migration guidelines. What can they do? Essentially, as a Power Platform admin, and you're seeing things every day, you're watching things, you're monitoring, you're seeing all these pieces. You get to be part of the advisory for what happens to data as they come in and out. That has to integrate going through these systems. These gateways, when they point the data to the outside, they essentially open up whatever basically comes in. It's like opening up a window in the city or opening up the windows in the country or opening up the windows where there's a big factory nearby. What comes in is maybe out of your control, but at least you can advise to say, maybe we should not open the window because that factory's next by blowing their smoke at us. Things like that. But this is something that you have to speak up for. Migration is an event that occurs. It's not a day-to-day occurrence, but a lot of that's going on still. Folks are still coming out of on-prem, or they're coming out from other systems and happening. The administrator is a stakeholder to that event, but they are not the person that's necessarily in charge. of the migration. Think about that for a moment, because it's almost like its own party to itself. All right, the Power Platform admin team. Let's look at them. The fundamental admin role for any Power Platform admin task stuff. So if you go into M365 and you pick down the roles, you'll see one that says Power Platform admin. So if you're going to do that Power Platform stuff, you obviously need that one. What about the Dynamics 365? Well, okay, if you got D365 happening, obviously you must have this. This is very important. But maybe that's not you. Maybe there's a different group that's doing it. But you got to realize that if there is a different group that's doing it, essentially you're living in the same space, because after all, Power Platform, if you recall, is living inside of, or rather on top of D365. So what they do can affect you. Right. So if that person's different, you're going to have some detente or some, let's just say, agreement with them, or they're either your best friends, best buddies, or if you're not really close, I mean, maybe not even physically close, they could be somewhere else in the world. You're going to want to make sure that you're working with them constantly. Maybe, I don't know, a weekly. Hey, how's it going over there? Are you happy with your D365? Are you about to take away my Dataverse space? Yes. Other admin roles that are out there. This is probably the big question, probably why you're here right now. It's like, what about those other roles? Do I need to have global admin or global reader, Teams administrator, SharePoint administrator? That's usually a very big question that a lot of folks ask, especially when, say, Microsoft has like policies, not policies, but events that come in and bring in pieces for you that require certain levels of access. And you're wondering, hey, isn't the Power Platform admin good enough to do that? And they can tell you no, because we're trying to do something more. Well, there's a reason. All right. The best practice, though, for this is that these folks should be separate. It's nice that you perhaps are the global admin and Power Platform. That's all great and well, but it's not so much fox watching the chickens. That's a lot of responsibility, and on its face is a workload issue to consider. Having them separate, though, when roles are separate, you have a process. It's actually easier to audit. You actually have a trail of things that are going on, or easy to set up that trail, versus if you're doing it yourself and you have to trail yourself, right? Typical practice, of course, is that you might, though, and this happens often, is that the Power Platform person is typically the SharePoint or the Teams person as well, because a lot of folks think that they work in the same thing. I mean, you go to SharePoint and you go Power Automate for workflow, right? Change my form to an app instead, and they say, hey, isn't that like the same kind of folks that need that same kind of access? Isn't that the same kind of skill set? It's not. It's really hard to explain technically that it's really not. It's its own thing. But this is one that is typical, and one that's really hard to, talk yourself out of. It's the workload that happens with, say, SharePoint admin and Teams admin. That's the only thing that's going to be able to dictate you to get out of the job, as they say. Otherwise, expect that that's likely to happen. Global Reader, though, however, is highly recommended. And remember we talked about monitoring being a very important aspect of it. To be able to monitor stuff, you really want the full big picture. And if you're going to put in the Center of Excellence toolkit anyway, you're going to have it, right? If it's something temporary, or maybe a service account's going to do it, well, fine. Come up and decide how that's going to work. But at some point, the global reader is one of the typical roles that's going to be needed. The user admin role, in this particular case, is the case of license management. It's a tough one. Who handles the licensing? License management is something that's sort of akin to even the M365 seats. They're sort of the same thing. It's essentially, to get a license, you got to pay money. Are you responsible for that? Yes or no, life or death, you're going to get money or not going to get money? All right. If you are, then the user admin role is what you need to be able to make that change. You cannot do it from the Power Platform admin area on its own. Will Microsoft update that? Maybe. You could create, for example, maybe a hybrid role that's this and has those specific responsibilities. But that's a little tough, because if there's a change that happens somewhere, then you're basically sitting on its own piece, and that you have to maintain it. Okay, just think about that for a moment. All right. Guidance document basically shows a link to the guidance document. When I'm talking about guidance document, the guidance document in Microsoft about Power Platform administration, or just use and everything else, does talk about managing users. And they say, hey, this is what you should do. You should manage users and do all this stuff. But they don't really say that, oh, by the way, you had to have been an M365 global admin or a user admin role to be able to do it. So Just this is the one thing that it doesn't exactly hasn't exactly been fixed. They don't really have to fix it. What they're saying is this needs to be done, and you just have to figure out as an admin. It's your responsibility to figure out how to get it done. All right. So if licenses control is part of the work, admin is required. And there's another one, another group that we're talking about. It's the compliance management role group. Especially in large organizations that are, let's just say, very sensitive to regulations and compliance issues, this is a very important thing that you probably want to be part of, or at least have the folks with that access handy. We'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, let's see how we're doing on time. We're actually doing pretty well. By the way, admin in an hour is based on admin in a day, which was like, whoa, actually not enough to follow true admin and stuff. The fact that this is going to fit in an hour, a challenge, is going to be the challenge. Let's see if we can get away with it. So let's find out. Admin, what does an admin should do? So you should be a part of planning. You are a stakeholder. Whatever happens over here, you might be the administrator, but you need to be part of that group. If someone's trying to plan stuff around you, remember that generals group that's coming up with their lofty ideals? Well, you probably should participate to at least give the opinion or the suggestions to the general. General, we don't have enough troops over here. General, their weapons are bigger than ours. That sort of stuff. Be part of the planning. You're going to be planning, dealing with the environments because you have full view of them. Capacity, especially, you're watching those things grow, shrink through the day, every day. Governance, of course, because governance is affecting you. This is akin to voting, right? If you don't vote, then you don't get a say. You want to be part of that. Monitoring the licenses. You're likely, at the very least, you got to monitor those. Think of that as a responsibility. Whether or not you have control of turning them on or off, you need to know what they are, because at some point someone's going to ask you, someone's going to get mad and think it's your fault. All right, managing those licenses. Let's see. So when you say managing those licenses, at least know who's got them, at the very least, or at least know who you need to talk to make things happen. The DLP policies for the environments. Now that is absolutely in the Power Platform role in the actual tool set. Whether you do it in the CoE or in the admin center, that is part of the things for the environments. So this one, let's just say it would be malpractice if you left it all in default status. You're not doing that, right? You don't leave everything on as default, but that's part of the job for sure. All right, and just keep in mind that this is not, for the folks that are wondering on M365, when we say DLP and Power Platform, it is not the same, absolutely, than DLP and security and compliance. DLP and security and compliance is about actual policies that say if somebody mentions this kind of information here and through a chat or through an email, it's going to catch it. This kind of document has this kind of classifications. It's about labeling and doing those pieces over here to come up with and making sure that you're in compliance, making sure that security is in place. In the case of DLP in Power Platform, if you're already not aware, that's about whether or not connectors are able to do whatever it is that you want them or don't want them to do. Right? So it's like an on-off switches for things. Right? It's a big difference. All right, monitoring capacity. We talked about that a little bit earlier as part of planning. You're monitoring capacity. So you're in order to be part of the planning, obviously you got to monitor it. What are capacity things? APIs, API calls, right? That actually is capacity. The reason why people pay for Power Platform is given a capacity, they can do all this kind of stuff and they only have to pay the 1 monthly fee and they're done. Otherwise, it's pay as you go. There is sort of a pay as you go feature for some Power Platform stuff, but that's handled in Azure. In Azure, where it's pay as you go, that stuff, they have to manage that more directly. In this particular case, you want to make sure that you're not hitting those limits. Sort of like your volume controls on your speakers and you're watching it, and every time it goes red, if it's going red too much, you got to lower it and get going. All right, other things, activity in general. What is happening? What kind of flows? What kind of connectors are being used? All those pieces. The usage of the system. I have all these licenses that all these folks that are licensed, and maybe only 2 or 3 of them appear to be using them. Important things to be watching out for. The Dataverse space, of course, the storage capacity. Remember, Dataverse exists whether or not you paid premium or are using it. The fact that you have Power Platform means that you have Dataverse. It's well, I didn't turn it on. I didn't do anything. Actually, all of that stuff has Dataverse under the covers. It's in D365, right? Which means Dataverse under the covers, whether or not you use it. So you have to manage that and watch that anyway. So you're never going to get out of it. All right. Other things, capacity and existence of various environment types. There's going to be all these environments that are set up. Maybe there's trial environments, there's sandboxes, and all those pieces. They have so much capacity within the environments that are out there. You would be responsible for at least monitoring how those are working. It's all about monitoring. In God we trust, in all others we monitor. Essentially, you trust no one. If you're not monitoring it, if you can't see it, if you don't know what's going on, don't expect someone to say, "Hey, we're doing fine over here." We'll take a look. I like this mod over here. All right. What an admin should do. Part 2. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. You should probably be working with the tenant admins on CrossTenant Isolation. So what exactly is CrossTenant Isolation? Here's a link to follow on that. The concept over here is if you have more than one tenant in your organization is large enough, or it doesn't have to be large enough. It's a case where there's multiple tenants that are part of your organization. Dealing with how that works is very important. So this is something that needs to be worked out with your admins. They, at the very least, if you follow that link that's shown over there, you'll see what the steps are to at least say yes or no. You can waive it and say this doesn't happen here. Done. Check it off. AD conditional active. That's Active Directory conditional access. Again, a link to that. Where does that come in? So there's APIs being created left and right by someone. Someone say created a custom connector. And now we gave it access to this group, and they're all having fun. And now, because we didn't do this AD conditional access, other people have stumbled upon it in the Azure space and start using it, and they were not supposed to use it. And this was only for this group, for this purpose, et cetera, et cetera. That's a live use case right there of an admin basically being confronted with the fact that, why do these people have access? Why can't you control it? Wasn't the DLP policies good enough? No, it wasn't. It's AD conditional access that handles it. All right. There are more items in the Center of Excellence. We'll talk about that. You're beginning to hear a pattern here about Center of Excellence, and yes, we'll come through that. Essentially, once they're done, they're done. Check them off, and you're okay. Tracking user access. There's a PowerShell that actually enables this ability. Essentially, it's custom logging. You have to be a global tenant admin for this power to be in, and you want it to be enabled to get that logging going. Now, here's the thing. You probably have this logging turned on already because your organization has to deal with compliance or discovery and all those other things that have to be there. This needs to be on in order to get that information. If it's not, it's the only way you can actually be fully covered as far as monitoring goes. If this is turned off for any reason, you really have to think this through. This information is in your system. And Microsoft has it whether you like it or not. It's going to be there. It's like, don't you want to see what they're holding? You should have it. All right. Let's bounce that away. You want to make sure you have, of course, the right access to do so. Remember that the compliance member group that we talked about? Here's how to set yourself up on there, or to have your admin set yourself up to be part of that group. And the good idea over here is when you're part of that group, you can at least look at what's happening in compliance on that side. Why would you need to care about that? Your DLP settings that you put together sort of need to match at least the policies on the other side. So somebody's going to either be proactive, or you need to work with that group to make it happen. If you're part of that group at least as a member, you have visibility and you can confirm and fix things quickly. All right, one last look for what an admin should do. Yeah, keep monitoring. What do we monitor? We're going to monitor the apps. What's going on with the apps? Are they running well? Are they crashing? Are flows running? Are they crashing? Are there too many? Are they doing what's going on? The connectors that are being used, premium, not so premium. Hey, why is everyone using SQL all the time? Wait a minute, what's this access over and over? Fussy is happening over here. So you want to monitor it. The sharing of stuff. Oh, yes. Folks are sharing. Yes, it's really nice. Sharing is caring, to be sure, but maybe sharing is caring not so much if it's to the wrong folks or in the wrong context. At the very least, you have to be aware, because if someone says, what happened over here, and you weren't aware because you didn't look. Yes, apps, flows, connector sharing. Yeah, CoE comes in again over here. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Monitor those reports. We talked about that. And reporting the reports. Again, what's the point of the reports? It's just sitting out there. At some point, what should the admin do? If I hire you as an admin, I bring you in there, and you're looking at these reports, and you don't tell me about the reports, at least at some interval, what's the point of the report? For that matter, that's what I need to have. Maybe you'll give me a summary. Well, I look at 5 reports, and the summary is A, B, and C, and D, whatever it is, come up with those metrics, but expect to be reporting on those reports. What's the point, right? Another thing that you should do, it may not be mentioned somewhere, but I think it's general knowledge, is to document your work, or as they say, cover your hiney in some places. All right, yes, documentation saves. Please believe that. Many times when we look back and says, oh my God, this happened, and we go back and said, and everyone's pointing fingers at each other, and while all that commotion is going on, and you produced a little paper that says, yes, sir, this is the documentation that says what happened, and everyone quiet and moves on, right? All right, let's take a look at some more over here. Some guidance for the Power Platform. Let's go into guidance. We're reading the guidance. Core job concept number 1 is managing costs. That's what they expect you to do. You may not have the purse strings with you, but license management is one of the things that you have to concern about. So it's either going premium or going home. The concept of the Power Platform is the concept of premium licenses or access licenses. Those are the things that are the cost that someone's going to say, oh my gosh, we have this. This is costing us money. I can't take my vacation because of that. You're managing those connectors because you have access to the DLP and those other apps. Aha. So you can do that. And when I say go premium or go home, think about this. If I get a premium license, and this is an important concept, I pay a premium license because maybe I just had to talk to Dataworks. Once I pay that premium license on a per user basis, I can use any other premium stuff. So if it's premium, I can use it. I've just essentially, I paid for the car and I'm not going to use it just to go to the store once a month. All right. I paid for the car. I'll drive with it. That's what I mean by premium or go home. All right. Per app per user. You must be familiar. These are concepts, by the way, you need to be familiar with as an admin, besides the licensing of premium versus non, which is the levers that say when you should per apps per user, per apps per user, per all these pieces over here, you want to be quite familiar with. Do you do unlimited apps or flows? There's tenant level strategies and tactics that go into that. This is beyond our topics over here. This is going into the details of how to be an admin necessarily. But in this particular case, these are topics that you should understand at least conceptually so that you can help make decisions or help with the planning. Those Power Automate licensing nuances, the concept of the creator versus the organization owners. You need to understand that inherently because one of the things that bite a lot, and usually they'll blame the administrator for not being able to tell what's true, even though it's really the developer that should know, is whether or not they're going to be paying that big chunky $500 a month for the first 5 flows, or whether each individual user will be getting a flow or someone's got to pay RPA. You need to understand those nuances. Whether you're using Power Portals and other data first pieces, this is basically your buying capacity when you're dealing with those particular items, all right? If you got teams, something to think about. Well, we're going to look at teams a little bit later. The next core concept that you need to be very good at is governance. Environment management is the key one. You need to understand security and DLP context in the Power Platform. When we say security, we mean security of people that belong or do not belong to an environment. Security of people who can or cannot see items in Dataverse. Those are the pieces. And of course, DLP context, remember what I said, what DLP was. That would be part of your roles. Management by organization, because you could decide, we could have environments that go through, say dev, test, prod. You might have heard of that in environment strategy, but another strategy is organization A gets an environment, organization B gets an environment, the legal, the sales folks get their own environments. You need to understand how that's happening. The ALM process, what's called the application lifecycle management process, the development. Even though you are not necessarily the person that should be doing that as an admin, they might expect you to do it. By the way, fight that if that's the case, because that's DevOps. But most importantly, still, though, you are the manager of that because the DevOps folks might come up with whatever strategy they want. We're going to move things here and there. But as the administrator, you are the manager, you are the stakeholder. So you need to be familiar with that. It's its own session, but well, there's some help for that. All right. Some environment key facts. You might have seen this particular piece of information before. It's out there in the Microsoft guidance, but you should understand how environments work. All right, so this is just a quick slide over here to just remind that environments have their nuances, and knowing how those work is very important. Let's take a look at our time. Actually, we're doing well. Important concept number 2 on governance. Things that you should understand. We talked about the ALM piece over here. Is to understand where your apps and solutions live. This is a very important concept. There, under the covers, Dataverse is pointing to where these things are. When you turn on, if you need to do solutions, you need Dataverse. This is actually interesting. It's like, okay, they say the best way to move things around are in solutions, and all of a sudden, I just went from basic to premium. Oh, you just killed my licensing just by going to that. Hey, don't panic yet, because if things get big enough, there's a way you can like get your money back a little bit for some of those things. But this is actually very important. If you want management, all right, you may have to pay for it. Otherwise, you have to find a way to get around it. If I don't want to pay for the premium, so let's just move apps by zip files left and right. Okay, the workload is going to happen. Someone's going to spend the time to physically do that, or to write the scripts, or to troubleshoot the scripts when they don't work, because you're essentially trying to do something on the cheap over here. So understand where these things live so that you can make that decision and say, look, we have mission critical app that's going from here to there. And folks, we need to pay premium for this, because if we don't, the management for this is going to kill us. So the environment types is one place where you can control a bit of that. There's the concept, of course, is these nuance types, the dev plans, the trials, the sandboxes. There are differences between them. You need to understand how those work. And in the case of dev plans, for example, they're sort of like, and we'll cover that a little bit, they're limited in how they can be used, but they're great for development, because they open up everything. You can do premium-y stuff without having to pay. The trials. Trials is sort of like production, but they have an expiration. And by the way, they also do have some limits. Sandbox is the same thing. But sandboxes stay up there. But why can't we just use a sandbox instead of production all the time? There are differences, so you must understand how this works. All right. There's, of course, access to the types. So, for example, trials can be blocked. A lot of places will turn off trials, because the problem with trials is they actually use up space. All right. A trial is not free CDS for you. Trial will use up space. All right. Dev plans will not, however. Dev plans are in the area, but they are not going to use up space. That's okay. But then, of course, they're very limited in access, because essentially they're with Microsoft over here. And those are the only types you can really block. And Teams makes a big difference. Teams is literally its own environment. And is there capacity? Does it affect the overall capacity? Yes, it does. At the tenant level, it affects your capacity. So it's very important to understand how that works. Your teams could overwhelm the rest of your capacity, because everyone has those little chunky, and remember, it only is like 2 gigabytes at a time of space could actually add up. So there's a very significant process that's different than, say, dealing with production or one of those other pieces. You need to understand how that works. All right. Knowing how applications are published and shared. We talked about it a little bit. At the very least, communicating changes. It needs to be, if it's not necessarily your responsibility to do so, as an admin, you need to be in that loop for communicating those changes. And ultimately, it's your responsibility whether those changes are communicated or not. Even though, oh, the dev that created that should be telling people what's going on. Well, if it hurts somebody else in the Power Platform world, the admin will be the person they're going to look for. So obviously, knowing the more you know, as they say, if you know what's changing, and by the way, the CoE is a great tool for that. If you know what's coming, it's much easier for you to at least say that, hey, yeah, I knew about that, right? It's like, I know what happened over there. No, you don't want to say that. You really want to know, and that's part of it. The sharing culture. So if the sharing culture is applied, this is a very important thing that you need to understand for your organization. This is different for everywhere. Microsoft has a point of view, by the way, on how you should do this, obviously. But frankly, I've never seen it done exactly like that. That's a nirvana way of going through things. And everyone will come very close to that. There'll always be some nuance. Always understand what your organization's view of sharing information and sharing applications and sharing solutions are. Follow that. All right. More on governance. All right. And part 2 of the application solutions management. So the lifecycle management and DevOps. As an administrator, you need to at least understand what's in place. In some cases, there is none. It's the case of just moving zip files here and there. Again, warning, this is basically flying without the parachute. Not really flying without the parachute, flying with the open air without the parachute. Those biplanes and stuff, that ones they can flip over and come out with, that sort of way of flying. Or driving without seatbelts, or just come up with any metaphor you like. There should be some sort of life cycle management, even if it is this is what you do process. You need to understand it. Stakeholder awareness is really your case over here. You should not be doing DevOps. If you're also the DevOps person and the admin, I'm going to tell you right now, your workload is going to be killer. Right? Because there's changes that come up. And of course, because a lot of this stuff is new, I really would say you want to find another person to help you out, or make that your job and make someone else the admin. All right. But at the very least, you are the stakeholder in this. You as the admin. Whatever happens in there does not stay there. That is not Vegas. That is your territory. All right. There should be defined roles and who's doing what. We talked about that a little bit. And of course, the communications and process is your responsibility at some point. Whether or not you have people doing those pieces or responsible for them, you're ultimately responsible for whether or not that happens. On the case of security compliance, you want to address those user management issues or responsibilities early. If it's truly you to give access for licenses and everything else, well, it needs to be in paper. Because if something goes wrong and they blame you for it, it's like, well, you know what? It's not on paper that I'm actually responsible. That's truly, though, especially if the issue was it didn't work because the MFA failed, or the MFA setting wasn't set up and security in the back end did whatever it is that they did that affected what happened with your app. You don't want to be necessarily be blamed for that. But truly, if that's your responsibility to at least maintain, you want to be told. All right. I talked about those defaults. Don't leave defaults. Please deal with defaults. All right. More governance nuances. There are nuances. D365 is out there, separate but equal, mainly because it's living in the same environment. We talked about this earlier, having that understanding between the roles. So that's that. I'm just going to push that aside right away. Portals. Portals are a bit of a different beast in that group. Currently, a sort of like not so visible stepchild or stepbrother or sister in this particular case. It's about, I'm sure that's going to change this year because Microsoft's making all kinds of changes, so it's going to be wonderful. But at the end of the day, essentially, these are websites. All right, so you are effectively a web administrator as part of your admin roles when you're dealing with the stuff. But a web administrator in the true way of the server web administrator, not the web administrator that actually pushes up or puts content out in and out. That's a developer, a web developer, right? For RPA, the robotic processing, and for Flow, remember, there's special licensing and capacity that's included in the governance. You need to be in that and really part of that whole thing. Let's take a look and see what we got over here. Oh, somebody's asking questions from the outside. Yes, wonderful. Okay, so that looks like I'm answering that question. Oh, that's right. We're in a bit of a delay for some folks. All right, so the best tool to manage it, the CoE. Wow, keep coming back to that one. CoE for the win. Dataverse is another nuance that's coming up over there. For the Dataverse, the concept of tenant total capacity versus capacity limits in the license. This concept is one that gets missed from a lot of folks, but this one has been done out there fairly early, when even before Dataverse got its final name, and when it was still called Dataflex for a little bit. And when we look at this and we say, okay, what does that mean? All right, there's a total capacity for the tenant, but then when I got a license for a person, I look at the guide, it says, oh, they get 400 megabytes. All right. So I can add, and every time I add, then they wonder, oh, how come I ran out of space? Everyone get 400 megabytes, and they're not even using that right now, because essentially you got so many that you ran up until the tenant total capacity, and just poof, you hit that. So you must understand those concepts, and you got to keep track of it at that level. More on governance. Oh, a lot of there. More nuances. Things about gateways. What are gateways? Gateways are connections to the on-prem or to the outside. You need to understand how those work, because whether or not what happens on the outside is going to be whatever happens on the outside. You need to be aware. Essentially, again, you're opening the window. It's up to you to keep that window open or closed at some point, right? The concept of these connections you need to understand. Expect to be collaborating with these folks on the other end of those gateways, right? However you do it, again, the same rules like working with the D365 folks or any other external person or group you want to be part of that. Azure registrations. This will come up every so often. An app will be created that requires essentially a set level of permissions. This is usually the Azure portal administrator that will have this kind of power for everything else. So the special apps and connectors, for example, that might need that information. Will you have to do it? Will you have to have access? Well, if you're doing the CoE, for example, by yourself, yeah, they expect you to have that kind of power, but you shouldn't plan for it. If you're in an actual organization doing that actual work, that's one of those roles that should be separate. All right. So again, you have to be that kind of type of admin and know all that stuff. Again, workload, or be in good terms with the person who is, because that's the one that you don't want any delays for. Good old Teams. Hey, remember, this is a very important concept. Teams. Just because it's free, they say, hey, no licensing. You can just do all this stuff. It doesn't mean that it is. There is a capacity limitation on Team. You heard of the first one, which is like the 2 GB space. The API limitation is the other one. So many API calls that can go through before it throttles itself out. It's the reason why the CoE can only live in limited form in Teams. You might have seen a CoE version for Teams. And well, so why would we want to do that in Teams? Well, maybe you want to have a limited look. They gave you the option because people wanted it, and they wanted to. They're saying that our capacity anywhere, we're not doing that much. This is fine. We're okay with this. Well, that's great that Microsoft made that available. But frankly, in my opinion, it should be yes or no. If you're truly serious about doing admin, you're in the big picture, or you're not, because you're missing out on the important admin pieces that are part of that. So, understanding those limits is important. And understanding and knowing how to do those management of the differences. When I say management, have you ever tried creating a Power App that runs inside of Teams versus, say, wanting to make that powerapps.com? If you ever seen that particular concept, you should, as an administrator, at least understand how that works. Someone might at least ask you for it. You may not be doing that every day, but they will ask you. It's different in Teams. The experience is different. What you can do, dealing with solutions, all those pieces, they're different. There's some things that are actually not there. Model-driven pieces, for example. You need to understand those differences because at the very least, someone might blame you for like, hey, administrator, why can't this work? You need to know why and explain why. Let's go look at now, with all that behind us, let's look at the tools because, hey, this is incomplete without great tools. All right, so the first one, so insight is key, monitoring, right? Within the admin center, we have powerful analytics. There's Dataverse analytics and there's automated analytics, Power Apps analytics, I should say. You want to basically, these are your main screens that you should have open somewhere, somehow, or be reviewing on a continuous basis. We talked about those logs. And by the way, here's where you can find them. If you're powerful enough, you can go take a look at these. If you're a reader, you can go take a look at these. But here's a quick, not exactly a quick, but here's a list of essentially what can be seen via those logs. So if you don't have access or any power to see these things, these are what you will miss if you don't. And they must be enabled again at the organizational level. Very important. So we talked about that here. All right, let's continue. So you wanted to leverage those management. If you are a script person and you're dealing with that, yes, there are scripts, there's powerful, there's all kinds of great stuff, and you can go crazy with this. Keep in mind, before you write and invent and recreate the wheel, the stuff probably exists somewhere. Go to the freebie sites to go find things that have already been done, or look at things like the CoE where the pieces are right there, already done for you. So think about that first. Knowing how they work used to be part of admin in the day. Creating those scripts used to be part of admin in the day. Well, that's almost like I want to learn how to be a driver, and then I go to the driver's course and I learn how to build a car as part of my driver's course. Well, that's great. I have a skill to create a car, but really that's not what it was about. I was here to learn how to drive. There you go. So the Centers of Excellence Starter Kit, and by the way, it's really not so much of kits. If you look at it now, it's more like a package, and a big one at that. This, oh my gosh, I still have to correct the spelling on this thing. I haven't done that, but essentially it is, but it is excellent. The Center of Excellence Starter Kit is, I think, an indispensable tool for any serious administrator, because it literally covers just about all the bases that are not there. Some people will say, well, Microsoft doesn't really support it, so we shouldn't put it in the system. And then what do? Well, you ask them to go build it yourself. And when you go and take the build it yourself course or follow the links, what do you end up doing? Taking the same exact script to build the same exact thing. Well, consider it an accelerator. They may not support it, but it gives you all the starting pieces to go ahead and knock yourself out and do it for yourself and say that you did it, therefore we support it. Fine. But frankly, that's the fight. If you're having that fight with your security admin, and tell them, well, if I build it myself, it's never going to be as good as this. Or, yeah, I'm the greatest at this thing, but it's now going to cost you X because I have to build it. All right. So things that are in there, the admin core components, essentially looking at, see that? Environments by app count, app makers, where things are happening. Just these dashboard alone, they're gold just to have them, because having to create them yourself, oh my gosh. There are solutions that are ready to go over here. Governance components, auditing, little messages that go out that say, makers, you tell us what the risk is for using your app. Make your case, for example, or maybe just reporting apps that are risky and everything else. Great, those are all ready to go. Other solutions, there are nurture components. Now, remember I told you the nurture folks are a different group. This is to help them going, but you as the administrator essentially have the power, because you're putting this in, to help them set it up. Most importantly, the fact is you're a stakeholder for any nurturing that goes on. You have essentially a seat at the table automatically with something like this. The audit log components we did talk about, so just pretty much essential information. It goes beyond those analytics that you saw on the admin center. The admin view is like a model-driven app that's in there. You want to learn how to do model-driven apps or dashboards or apps in general, actually open up the CoE stuff, and you can learn a lot from just how they did it. But anyways, so this one over here is your dashboard. You're likely, if not the dashboard Power BI, this is where you're going to live as an administrator on a day-to-day. All right, the DLP policy it's different than what's in the main admin center. I just want to make that very clear that it's different. Let's take a little time. Got a few minutes left. All right, on the DLP customizer, that's just basically you to come in and make your own custom packages. Now, what's cool is, what if you have to create environment after environment after environment? It's a pain to have to go through each one and reset it up from scratch. Wouldn't it be cool if we can just copy it and move it around? That's what this is all about. Connector usage. I would say that this is an indispensable tool. You need to know what's being used, when, and everything else. Whether or not people are asking for it now, people will. Application monitoring, I think that speaks for itself. Setting a new app owner, remember we talked about that, like that security and admin. This one over here also worth its price in gold, because this is something that does happen more often than not. Your day in the life might be, hey, this user won the lotto and left the company, and they were the owner of X. No problem. You're now the owner. You're done. A compliance center, essentially used in the app auditing process. You're taking a look at what's out there. Remember, I told you being that you probably should be part of the compliance member group. This at least lets you come to the table full-fledged and say, hey, we're in compliance, because look, here are my folks. All right, there's a request flow, so you can say, you could make the users essentially do that work for you, making sure they're in compliance. Of course, there's a process flow for the auditing process itself. You want to validate those business requirements and everything else. Again, just extra tools. At some point, if you haven't yet seen the CoE, go attend a session that talks about the CoE in general, or anything new that comes up, or just go and check out all the videos for it. It's indispensable tool. It's almost, I think it's probably a day in the life of using the CoE should be something that you should follow up on. It's a good one. Archive and cleanup. That's something administrators do, right? Remember that restart server or cleanup? That is probably likely going to be on your area. It might be the responsibility of folks to clean up after themselves. Well, like my mom says, you clean up after yourself, and all that stuff. Yes, we'll follow along, Mom. But in the end of the day, doesn't she come by and yeah, we're not so nice. But yes, think about it that way. All right. Application risk assessment, actually very interesting. This is a starter, though, on looking at that, but it's a very useful way to quickly, especially when you stand this up the first time, find those apps, handle the ones that are risky and get them out of your way and make your life as an admin much nicer. A theme editor, well, why not? Because we making our own colors is really important. Innovation backlog, this is more for, again, the nurturing folks going forward. Actually, this is actually a really cool tool. But as an administrator, wouldn't worry about it. A welcome email for all those folks that are out there dealing with the app catalog is easily, we're just going to breeze through some of these. The template catalog, the training in a day management. As an admin, would you care about this? Again, out of your purview, but you have the power. All right, newsletter and power updates. You're probably going to be the first customer for that, but wouldn't it be cool if the makers were in the know for themselves? Those audit logs, getting them synced. There is, of course, for the ALM piece, and by the way, this has had a makeover recently, but that's on a separate course. Resource requests, so if they want things that are out there. So there might be new features that are out there to deal with, like co-authoring. Now, oh my gosh, I have to be a GitHub administrator too? No, again, think about the same case with ALM. The emails now for flows, they're making changes all the time. So things that help you as administrator. All right, the ability to export these licenses back and forth. Little features that are out there. There are more coming. So next steps. There's this concept of the maturity model. You may want to go find that out there. There's a metric out there. If you want to be able to measure yourself, how your organization or how you guys are doing, this is our recommended path to follow. Go ahead and take a look at that through. So you want to use that guidance document as your education plan, the guidance document from Microsoft. Have a dev tenant. Get one. It makes it very easy to work with. Of course, practice makes perfect. Just playing. If you're a maker also, you're essentially having the dog food as well. You can at least commiserate with them. And of course, consider bringing in Microsoft. Microsoft has all kinds of programs for in-a-days and for the CoE activation and everything else. Talk to your customer success manager for your organization. If you don't know who that is, try to find out, because there are some programs that at least will make it a little easier to get into. Let Satya pay for it if you can. So normally an AMA at this time, but it looks like I went right up to the hour, and we'll have to close it at there. And for questions that are going to come through, we'll try to follow on the QA over here afterwards. But if you have to attend the next course, go ahead. And it was wonderful having you all over here. And we can always go online to keep that going.